Hey, welcome in, guys, to an eliminated version of Stacking Dubs. The stack has toppled over. The season is over. Warriors, as soon as that Steph Curry injury happened, never had a chance, apparently. We all thought that, hey, maybe you steal a game or two at home. You got to at least win one out of three, maybe four games if Steph's going to be out there game five and return game six. Turns out that was just never really a chance of having that happen either on the front of winning a game, which after they essentially emptied the tank in game three, and that was their best chance to steal a game, and it didn't happen. Never really were in this series and didn't have a chance of truly upsetting Minnesota. You would say that they had a shooter's chance, but they just didn't have the shooters. They just didn't have the clean looks. Everything Minnesota seemed to get in the last couple of games were just clean looks and just breaking down the perimeter point of attack defense. And yeah, Minnesota shot whatever 60% from everywhere. But ultimately, they were all good shots, and we had no answers on the defensive end and even less answers on the offensive end. So, not surprised that Minnesota took care of business despite 20 something turnovers and us winning the free throw and offensive rebound battles last night. It just still didn't matter. The game wasn't that close. And honestly, I don't think Steph was that close to returning either. I know he had hopes of a 3-day rest, and if there was a game six, maybe he would have come back. Doesn't really matter. But as you kind of hear that he was, light, cleared for light on court work, shooting. I mean, he hadn't sprinted yet. Doesn't sound like he really even. Maybe he was just lightly jogging, but to go from that and then in 3 days to sprinting, decelerating, changing direction, absorbing contact, and also playing the amount of minutes that you would need from him just to be maybe in a game that would be extremely tough to win. I just it probably wasn't happening. I hate to say it, but ultimately it doesn't really matter. I guess I'd say I'm disappointed. You feel like you're robbed from just not having Steph. It's a similar feeling, although not quite as magnified as when we lost to the Raptors in the finals, when obviously Durant and Clay both went down, and you cling to hope that hey, some Durant might come back by game four or whatever it was, or game five, and then you're holding out hope, but ultimately it's ripped from you. Your heart is ripped from you. You never really had a chance, and it just sucks, especially because at this point in Steph's career, and all of our stars' point of their career, you just don't know how many more shots you're going to have left, and it's hard to not believe that this was not the best shot that the Warriors would have left when you look at the remaining teams in the playoffs. A hampered and about to be eliminated Celtics team. You can beat the Pacers. You can beat the Knicks. um you can hang with Denver, and you won the series, the season series with the Thunder. So all those things, I think the Warriors would have at least had a shot. And now every team gets a year older, which for the Warriors is worse, and for most of these other young teams is another year of experience and improvement. And with a lot of superstars like Durant and Giannis and whoever else might become available at some point going to other teams, enter Cooper Flag and other young players. And just as more breakouts happen, the level of competition rises around you. So a lot of work for the Warriors to be done because this might have been their best chance. And we don't have to get too much into it. We'll take a look a little bit later this episode at kind of what the Warriors are going to be looking to do in the offseason around maybe a little bit of the Kaminga options, but just kind of focusing on, the current team that we had this year and just kind of reflecting, this team was dead in the water. The Jimmy Butler trade gave them a shot of life, and it leaves them better off now than they started the year. It leaves you at least with what was the biggest hole of who's your second star slash scorer. Now the biggest question is, hey, who's your third scorer? And that's a slightly better problem to have. The size issues, which the Warriors have had forever and have gotten away with playing small ball and just taxed Draymond's body playing center as a 6'6" center for at least 50 of the games this season. Ultimately caught up. Draymond just didn't have it. And you can just see, as even when Draymond's locked in. And I thought he was mentally focused and good the last couple of games just from a mentality standpoint, but just didn't have the gas, just didn't have the explosiveness, defensively, especially. Wasn't really flying around and just being impactful on the defensive end. And, credit the Wolves, but also it's just playing undersized for that long. It just wears on you. And at 35 years old, you just can't do that for another season and expect to be competitive and as fresh as you need out of your defensive anchor come the playoffs after a long, grueling season. I mean, Draymond played what 70 something games this year. He'll be a probably first team all defense NBA, well deserved. Should have been the defensive player of the year, in my opinion. Also, that ship has probably sailed now that Wembanyama is going to be healthy and alive for the foreseeable future. So also Draymond's best shot to win a DPOY. And, ultimately the size, for as well as the Warriors rebounded, it just your defense is just working overtime all year long. And when you don't have the rim protection next to Draymond and your point of attack defense breaks down like it did in the last couple of games, then you better be able to score some points. And when you don't have Steph Curry and you have no shooting, no spacing on the floor, your next two best scorers, and that being Jimmy and Kaminga, are also not spacers of the floor. You're just not going to get clean looks. And then throw in the fact that the Wolves have Rudy Gobert, who the one good thing he can do is protect the hoop and in the paint. And it's just all sorts of matchup nightmares, and you're just not going to score enough points. Which, ironically, the Warriors did score 110 points in each of the last two games. So Kaminga's little breakout did show that, hey, maybe this offense can can score enough points to win games if your defense is that locked in. But I think we all know that that's fool's gold. A lot of this offense just was not good and is not a sustainable offense. But with Steph back, maybe it looks a little bit different. We didn't really see through the whole quartet of Steph, Jimmy, Dre, and Kaminga in a lineup long enough to see if it could work. Maybe it would. Maybe we find out next year. Again, we're going to talk about that in a little bit more. But back to the shooter's standpoint, just from this current build, and you can point at Jimmy Butler's play, and I mean, there's a few reasons why you didn't really truly get playoff Jimmy's best. Obviously he was dinged up, tailbone injury, we already know, and just hobbling around, and I'm sure that was still affecting him. B, just gassed, right? He played 42 averaged minutes over the last four games. Just every single offensive possession ran through him in game two, game three, game four, and ultimately just gassed out, especially in game three, where that one good scoring out performance he left it all on the court and he didn't get that game. C, he was sick, pretty sick the last couple of games. The energy clearly wasn't there, and throw that into just being gassed and fatigued in general. And then D, you didn't surround him with any shooting. What he does best is, he gets into the paint. He can either A, draw a foul, B, up fake, which he does pretty much every time. And throughout the course of a series, the defense starts to realize that and stop jumping on the up fakes. And then if that's the case, hey, you have the defense collapsed into the paint, you're kicking the shooters. But if there are no shooters, there is no spacing. Now you're really just getting what you saw at a Jimmy, and that's just kind of get into the paint at best, and you just kind of get stuck, and the clock runs down, and now you're throwing up one of 25 grenades at the end of the shot clock that it seemed that every Warriors player faced at some point in this game. And again, that's just not going to score enough points. The irony, which is interesting, actually, before I get to the irony, I just want to make a point that it's amazing how much Steph in the lineup masks. He masks so much. Like, this is the same team, but with Steph, the spacing issues, while they were still there, the offense still worked, right? Steph gives everyone else like 2, 3 feet of space to operate. And I think the stat at some point in this year, I don't know if it's the entire season, but with Steph on the court, number one most efficient offense in the NBA. Steph off the court, number 30, dead last in the NBA. And just to have that much impact and to be able to even have a top 10, let alone top one offense with this group of players, just by having Steph Curry on the court just shows how valuable he is and how important to a team. Uh, Spacing, dynamic, everything, and playmaking, especially that Steph is. So I don't want to talk about Steph too much more, other than the fact that, man, he was sorely missed, and you appreciate just how great he truly is. Back to my irony in the fourth quarter when the Warriors actually made the run that they did to trim it to 9 at one point, and I swear if it wasn't for a bunch of Quinn post turnovers, mistakes, didn't really want to be out there, but you kind of rolled with that lineup because it was working, and he kind of provides spacing at that point at best. The irony is that Pajemski, Kaminga, and Moody were the best offensive players in this game. And, even though it was short spurts and it was mainly just Moody and Pajemski in that fourth quarter, and then Kaminga throughout the rest of this game and series, those are the three that you pointed to throughout the season and kind of in the Rockets series that, man, they're so inconsistent. You're getting nothing out of them, especially in the last series and early this series. Kaminga wasn't even in the rotation. Moody hasn't been in the rotation, and Pods has been as up and down roller coaster of a sophomore season as you'll get. Positives being that at least there were ups. He was magnificent in that fourth quarter. I don't know what got into him, but you see glimpses of what he can be when he's confident and aggressive, and the whole package is working. But isn't it interesting, right? It's just like this whole year, you can just kind of point to the Warriors' success based on the ups and downs of their role players, and namely their young, up and coming, supposedly improving role players in Pods, JK, Moody. I mean, you can throw TJD in there if you want to as well. And it's what at oftentimes gives this team hope that, hey, you have three supplementary scorers who can sort of space the court, can all defend decently, at least on ball at times, and it gives you hope for the future. And this whole two timelines thing, which is not a thing, I must emphasize. But then, as a lot of role players and young players do, they have good games. But what great players do in this league is you have good games consistently. And it's just consistency, right? Anybody can be a flash in the pan. Kaminga could have 3 or 4 great games in a row in the playoffs. He can have a month or two in a row scoring over 20 points. And there's still just flashes where he'll just become unplayable and for stretches at a time. And I thought it was just interesting and something that going forward you have to make a decision on, hey, are these guys it? Are they inconsistent? Are you sticking with them? Or what are we doing? Because the fluctuation is basically what's going to dictate how you have success around this core of players who you're going to get consistent Steph, Jimmy, and Draymond going forward. So how do you build around them? Like I said, so kind of looking forward. Let me take a second, take a sip of coffee. You're better off than you started last year. I know everyone's a little older, but at least you have Jimmy Butler. You have a 1-2 punch. You have a defensive star still in Draymond Green, assuming that you're keeping that triad of players together. And now you're filling in, and you always knew what the issues are going to be, but you have another chance to try to fill some gaps. And the biggest gaps are obviously you need to find a center, someone who can give you some rim protection, and preferably someone who can space the floor a little bit so you can play lineups like Draymond and Butler together. I know you're asking a lot, and there's not that many players in the league like that. But hey, someone like a Brook Lopez, you can find that would be helpful. Yeah, I mean, there's not a ton of players, but you just need to find an impactful center because first and foremost, the size is just killing this team and is just running this team into the ground. And I don't need to expand on it any more than that. We all know that small ball works for spurts at times when everything's clicking, when you have spacing. And like you saw in the dynasty years where you have oversized athletic wings like a Durant, an Iguodala, a Livingston, guys like that, even a Harrison Barnes, you can go small when you have huge wings. And the Warriors are undersized even during small ball. So it just doesn't, or especially during small ball with Dre at center. You need to find a new point of attack. It doesn't have to be a point guard necessarily, but you need to find a better perimeter defender that can be a two-way player. Obviously, it's a risk because he's coming off injury, but DeAnthony Melton is the first name that comes to mind. Hey, can you get him back for cheap? He loved it in San Francisco. We loved him. It was short-lived, but you saw glimpses of it. How nice would it have been to have DeAnthony Melton in this series just to guard Ant, to space the floor, to be another ball handler? Get him back on that mid-level exception or just even a veteran's minimum at this point, and that is a great starting spot. And then lastly, not lastly, but next most importantly, you got to find a better third scorer. You can't just say you're going to rely on either Pods, Moody. I mean, I guess Kuminga is that third scorer, but he just obviously doesn't fit the dynamic that you need elsewhere. And we all know the reasons why. If you bring back Kuminga, sure, that fills that spot and that third scorer need, but then you have other issues as well in terms of spacing. What do the Warriors have in terms of assets? Well, obviously, with Kuminga being a restricted free agent, sign and trade is the most obvious option. I'm going to talk about that in just a second. You have picks, and you have four first round picks in 26, 28, 30, 32. You can do first round swaps and all the odd years in between. You have the picks. The problem is salary matching. So you just don't have a lot of salaries. I mean, outside of your big three, Kuminga, talking about sign and trade in a second. And then next, I think it's like Buddy at 9, Moody at 11, 10 or 11 or something like that. So it's going to be hard to put together enough in terms of salary matching to even offload a bunch of first round picks to get a player back, unless you're literally trying to get a $15 million player with all-star upside, and then who in their right mind is going to want to trade someone like that. So therein lies the problem there. The only other option is you're throwing Draymond in a trade, and that's a whole thought experiment we're not going to go down. There's the trade Jimmy and that huge contract with a bunch of first round picks and just go chase a Durant or Giannis, which they would have to want to come here and more or less demand a trade here. And who knows if those teams, if you're rebuilding, you even want Jimmy at that point. Maybe the Suns do. I don't know. But let's get to Kuminga. So Kuminga obviously is a restricted free agent. He's going to get some offer sheets, which means that the Warriors are going to first tender him for, I think, 7.9, 9.7, one of those two. And any team that has enough salary to sign to give JK an offer sheet. So I'm looking at like the Brooklyn Nets, who I think are the only ones with the ability to offer at least $20 million in cap space. So say they offer him $20 million, the Warriors can choose as a restricted free agent to match that and retain the rights to Kuminga, or they can say, fine, take him for $20 million and you let him go. Chances are you're going to hopefully look for something that is a sign and trade. And what gets interesting in that is, first off, you have to determine what is his value, right? Contract wise. So he needs 3 years minimum in terms of his next contract if he's going to be signed in trade. If it was up to me, what I would pay him, fair market value, 18 to 23 million dollars per year, adjusted for inflation a bit. That's what I think he's truly worth. I think he'll get a bit more than that just because you see the upside and someone's going to be willing to swing in the maybe $25 million range. He turned down $30 million a year last year, but I think his value has dropped. But maybe not after this playoff series. Maybe someone's excited enough about him, which would be a good thing, but also could be a bad thing in terms of if we end up resigning him. But the interesting thing is, so say let's call it $22 million. The way it works in terms of salary matching is if you're signing and trading him, his value going out in terms of salary matching is only worth 50% of what he makes based off of the first year of his contract. So if he's $22 million, he is only you can trade him and can get an $11 million guy back. And you can't aggregate contracts either. So we can't do like Kuminga and Buddy and Moody in a sign and trade at least and get someone worth more. So a lot of players are off the table there, right? Because if you figure Kuminga gets at most $30 million in that first year, then at most you're getting a $15 million player in return. I believe that's how it works. Don't quote me on that. But from what I've kind of learned watching some Bobby Marks and just kind of reading about it, I'm pretty sure that that's how that works in a sign and trade situation. Plus, the team inheriting him would end up being hard capped. They can't go over the apron. There's all sorts of stipulations that go in. So it's a very complicated sign and trade situation where you start to think if that player doesn't exist that helps you more than like Kaminga would at half the salary for Kaminga. I mean, I off the top of my head, I couldn't really tell you too many players. Maybe there's a few. Maybe there's a few on like their rookie contracts or something like that. But if again, if that's the case, another team is not going to want to trade them. And if they are, you're going to have to package a bunch of first round picks with that. So you're talking like a whatever Kaminga and two first round picks, and you're hoping to get somebody like I don't even know who's on their first year contract right now. Call it, I don't know, Stephon Castle. That's not happening. That's not a good example, but I'm just thinking of the best rookie. Wembenyama. There you go. Let's do it for Wemby. Anyways, if you choose to look at, okay, what happens if we sign Kuminga and hold on to him? Well, if you sign him for, I think, over about 20 million, that puts the Warriors over the first apron, which would then mean that you have some exceptions which you can use. So you would only be able to use the mid-level taxpayer exception of, I think, $5.7 million. So maybe that's like your Milton right there if we're lucky versus if you let Kaminga hypothetically just walk for nothing and you're under the apron, now you have a mid-level exception worth about $14 million. Interesting. And again, depends who you're able to get. Anyways, we will talk much more about this, but that's kind of where the biggest issue and the first thing that the Warriors are going to have to figure out as they go into the offseason lies. This is just how I think. I like to be a problem solver, not a problem blamer. So, hey, season ends. We can reflect back on all what that went wrong. But what makes me feel better coping going forward is figuring out the next plan and just having some options there. So, I'm going to leave it there. Lastly, all I'll talk about is Steph Curry's legacy and the fact that you can't there is no two timelines. You have to cash in right now. You have to use whatever picks you can to put and whatever trade assets you have in players and whatnot to put the best team around Steph. And I'm assuming that's also Jimmy and Dre. And you have to figure. I said it last year that this year was more or less all in or bust. Next year is even more so all in or bust because you just don't know how many more years of Steph you have left. Their contracts are up soon after that, and assuming there's no extensions, which hopefully there are, but he's turning 38 next year. You just don't know. And health wise, as the first soft tissue, first hamstring issue that Steph's had, I think he's had a groin soft tissue, but truly like muscular soft tissue once these things start to happen, it typically doesn't get less frequent of injuries, right? And then everything starts to compensate, and it just kind of means that hey, his soft tissue has started to get a little bit firmer, a little bit rougher, a little bit tighter, and hopefully Steph will be just fine for next season, getting through a playoff run. Anyways, guys, it's been a heck of a season. I'll still be with you through the off season, and thank you guys for tuning in through this year. We have some opportunities to partner with a couple other channels, so we're gonna collaborate and stay tuned. You might see me on some other channels and bring some others onto this, and we'll see what we can do. It's been a fun about a year and a half doing stacking dubs. I intend to keep going strong. I will commit to doing stocking dubs as long as Steph Curry is still a Warrior. And I appreciate you guys taking this journey on me. Hang in there. It's been a tough season, but on to baseball season, Giants, and then some Niners season schedule just came out. All right, guys, it has been real. I've been Chris Chinn. Do me a favor, like, subscribe. Let's keep it going. The more likes I get, the longer I keep on going. And I will talk to you guys in the off season. Till then, peace, love, and stacking dubs.